Hello and welcome. Let's learn how to make Hungarian goulash. The first thing you need to do is slice up 2 onions or 2 pounds. I know that sounds like a lot of onions, but it just gives such a wonderful flavor. Slice these into about 1/4 of an inch or about 6 millimeters. You can also chop them into fine pieces. It's really up to you how you like the texture of your onions. Repeat this for the second onion, and then you're going to set that aside. And if you need help along the way, get someone to cut them for you. If you can tell, I am not cutting these onions. This is my lovely husband helping me. You all know that I do not do well with sharp utensils, and maybe he doesn't either, but we manage along just well. So let's thank him for helping us learn how to make this wonderful stew. Cube the meat into 1 to 2 inch pieces or 2.5 to 5 centimeters. You want some stew meat or something like London broil. You want a tough meat. You don't want to spend a lot of money on the meat because the process of cooking it really low and slow will tenderize the meat, and using those expensive cuts of meat is just a waste of money. Also, they tend to disintegrate in stews. I don't recommend that you get the ones that's already cut up into little small chunks because those usually just don't taste very well because they've been cut up for quite a while, and it just has a fresher flavor if you cut the meat yourself. In a large stock pot, we're going to heat it on a medium heat and add 1 tablespoon of oil or 15 milliliters. We're going to add those onions from earlier, and we're just going to toss them until they just start to sweat and they get a little bit shiny like you're seeing here. Then you're just going to remove them and we're going to cook the meat. Add another tablespoon of oil or 15 milliliters, and then you want to add the meat in a single layer. You want to brown it on each side for 2 to 3 minutes. You want to cook this in batches. You don't want to crowd the pan. Take your time and flip over each little piece so you get a really nice sear to the meat. It makes a huge difference in this stew. It'll take you about 10 to 15 minutes total to do this process. You want to cook this in batches because if you cook it all at once, you'll get way too much moisture. You're still going to get some moisture in the end when you add all the pieces back together, but that's normal. You just want to cook this down until most of the moisture is out. It'll take about 10 minutes, and you want to keep the heat low. Don't rush the heat up. You want this to be a tender stew. See how it's starting to reduce? And the house is smelling wonderful. Now, some people will tell you to drain this. I'm encouraging you not to drain it because there's not a lot of fat in this recipe, and you want that fat in there for the flavor. Once you get it to this point and there's not a lot of liquid left, you're going to add in your flour. You want to add in 1 tablespoon of flour or 3 grams. And you want to turn the heat down to low at this point, and you want to stir that flour in. Coat your meat really well with it, and that will just help both thicken up the sauce and then have the meat something to grab onto the paprika with. Some people will tell you to put the flour in the beginning with the meat, but I found that if you do that, it tends to make the flour taste burnt. So I like to add it in at this stage. It's entirely up to you when you want to add it in, but if you're going to use it as a thickener, if you burn the flour, it won't thicken the sauce as well. So you want to add it in after your meat is browned. Next, we're going to add in that paprika. We're adding in 3 tablespoons or 18 grams. I know it sounds like a lot of paprika, but it's absolutely essential you put some paprika in this so it tastes wonderful. Coat that meat well, and then you're going to add back in those onions from earlier. And you want to toss this together until it's well combined. Now you want to add in 1 can of tomato paste. We're using 6 ounces total. It's about a half a cup. And just toss the meat and the onions with it briefly, and then we're going to add in our water. I'm going to add 2 cups of water. That's 480 milliliters. You can add beef bouillon if you like, or you can add in some beef broth or some bone broth. That's up to you. You want to stir this until it's well coated, and then you're just going to put the lid on and let it sit on low for a half hour. You want to simmer goulash 3 to 6 hours, stirring it occasionally about every half hour until that meat is fork tender. The more you cook it, the more tender the meat will be. Here we are a half hour later, and look how much more liquid is already in this broth. It's not really bubbling or anything. That's typical. Give it a stir and then go ahead and close it, and you're just going to check it every half hour and give it a stir. Make sure that it doesn't boil any heavier than this. If it does, you want to turn that heat down even more. It has now been 2 hours. We're going to check the meat. It's pretty good. It's very tender, but it's not quite there. We're going to cook it a little bit longer, and you're going to see the sauce start to thicken up at this point. The meat should be really fork tender, and it should be absolutely beautiful. Now, if you didn't use broth, you may want to add salt at this point. Try a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon, stir it up, and then taste it. You don't want to add the salt too early because you can add too much salt, especially if you're using a broth instead of just water. Doesn't this look delicious? This is a fabulous meal to eat. It lasts for days. You can serve it over noodles, or you can serve it with potatoes, or just eat it as it is. I can't explain to you how simple yet effective this meal is. It's one of the most wonderful tasting things you'll ever have. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Here are your ingredients if you want to follow along. Thank you for visiting us at jacksonsjob.com. And as always, happy baking.